Galaxy S23 Ultra did not come with a lot of new upgrades, but one of the few upgrades it did come with is a new camera, a 200 megapixel camera to be exact. With the release of this new camera, there might be a few curiosities and a lot of questions. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's get right into that. The first thing you're going to want to know is that you are not taking 200 megapixel photos by default. You're going to have to switch over to that camera by selecting it from the aspect ratio menu here at the top. You can see here that once you do, you'll see an icon that dictates that you're taking pictures in the 200 megapixel mode. Next thing to know is that it only works in photo mode. When switching to another mode like portrait, pro mode, or even night mode, you'll notice that there is no option to take a picture with all of that 200 megapixel detail. You may or may not have caught this when I was explaining the first fact, but the third fact is you only have one aspect ratio choice, which is 3:4 in portrait orientation or 4:3 in landscape orientation. The next thing is the fact that you can only zoom in up to 6 times when actually taking a picture in the 200 megapixel mode. The result when doing this can come out okay if you're taking a picture of something that's close, but when taking a picture of something far, the photo pretty much falls apart. So this fifth fact actually remedies the last fact I just talked about, and that fact is the best way to zoom in on photos taken in this mode is to take a picture at one time and then zoom in as needed. Being that these photos are comprised of 200 megapixels, which means they have an extremely high resolution, you do retain a lot of detail, which makes it so that you can just zoom in on the picture as is and sort of retain most of that detail you're expecting. For this next fact, we're still sticking with zoom, and the next thing to know is that the zoom length, the overall maximum zoom length, has not changed. 100 times zoom is still the max you're going to get here. And this zoom factor is actually not controlled by this new 200 megapixel sensor at all. It is controlled by the second telephoto camera on the bottom of the device. I'm still pretty sure though that 100 times zoom is plenty for anybody anyway though. So this next point is one that I actually kind of touched on in my S23 Ultra review, but if space is something you're concerned about, then you'll want to make sure that you don't take too many photos in the 200 megapixel mode. The lowest amount I've seen these photos take is about 30 megabytes, while the highest is about 63 megabytes. To give you a rough estimate of just how much space you can potentially eat up, if you took 100 pictures that came out at 30 megabytes apiece, then you would eat up a little over 3 gigabytes rounded off. If you did the same thing and those pictures came out to about 63 megabytes, then you'd eat about 6 gigabytes of storage rounded off. The Galaxy S9 and Note 10 are both devices that had Samsung's dual aperture feature. Though they haven't brought this back like I've been wanting, they have opened up the aperture up by one stop. The 200 megapixel sensor on the S23 Ultra has a 1.7 aperture, which allows for more light as well as helps with the depth of field effect you get when taking pictures where your subject is in focus and the background is defocused. Try and explain this and hopefully not embarrass myself because I'm still learning about photography. The aperture is a hole in your camera that can either let in lots of light or can let in a little bit of light. Aperture is measured in f-stop numbers, which can tell you whether the hole inside of your camera is opened up wide or closed down. Typically a smaller number like 1.7 or 1.6 means that the aperture is going to be opened up very wide and let in a lot of light, versus an aperture like 11 would dictate that the aperture is actually closed down and not letting in much light at all. The aperture on a phone camera is typically set to a specific number. The lower that number, the wider the aperture and the more light that gets in. This is one of the main factors that allows the S23 Ultra to take better night photos and also gives it a better depth of field effect. The sensor size in the S23 Ultra has been increased a little bit when compared to the S22 Ultra. You now have a 1/1.3 sensor versus the 1/1.33 sensor in the S22 Ultra. Hopefully I said that right. Camera sensor sizes are confusing as it is, and it's still one of those things that's very hard for me to understand. So if anybody wants to explain the science behind it, please go right ahead. But just know that the sensor in the S23 Ultra was most likely made that much bigger to handle the extra 92 million pixels you get when compared to the S22 Ultra's camera and most of the Ultra cameras before that, which had the 108 megapixel sensor there, versus the now 200 megapixel sensor on the S23 Ultra. The last thing here is that you most likely won't be able to tell the difference between the 12 megapixel photos and the 200 megapixel photos unless you really look hard enough. Both types of photos pack an acceptable amount of detail and should make the majority of the people who purchase this phone happy. Just don't let the 200 megapixel camera be the only reason you purchase an S23 Ultra. Alright, so that is all I have for all of you today. And yeah, the 200 megapixel camera that is in the S23 Ultra is definitely something to take a look at, especially if you're into low light photography. I don't know if I can particularly say it's a major step forward, as I would definitely like to see Samsung improve the other cameras as well. Maybe even give us something like 15 times optical zoom or something like that. But just the ability to take pictures with more detail on a camera phone, that's a big step forward for sure. So with that being said, wherever you are in the world, have a great morning, a great afternoon, a great evening, and a great night, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.